right, thank you for joining us here at the New Smyrna Museum of History for another round of Archaeology Works with our friend Emily Jane Murray from the Florida Public Archaeology Network. It's great to see everyone join us today from around the world. We've got people from France, Greece, and people scattered from around it looks like the United States as well that are joining in with us today. So it's great to have a really diverse and wide-reaching audience for our program today. And I am going to introduce our host for today's program so that we can go ahead and get started. Emily Jane Murray earned a master's degree in anthropology from Brandeis University, where she focused on public archaeology and site museums in Northeast Florida. And she has a bachelor's in communication from Flagler College. She's excavated sites throughout the southeastern United States and created numerous outreach tools, including videos, activities, and museum displays. She currently works as a public archaeology coordinator for the Florida Public Archaeology Network Northeast region and serves on the board of the Southeast Archaeological Association, the Florida Anthropological Society, and the St. Johns County Cultural Resources Review Board, and that is a mouthful, and is the founding member of the Florida chapter of the Association for Gravestone Studies. Her interests include Florida prehistoric archaeology, historic cemeteries, and public archaeology and interpretation. Please join me in welcoming today our presenter, Emily Jane Murray.
Awesome. Well, thanks for everyone tuning in today. And we're going to talk a little bit about glass, as Greg was saying. This is part of an ongoing series that we've been doing in partnership with the New Smyrna Museum called Archaeology Works. So the idea behind this program is to not just tell you cool things that we found or tell you stories about the past, but to kind of go into the material science of archaeology, to talk about the items that we find and how we study them and what kind of specific information that we can learn from those things, and kind of, you know, pull back the veil and show you the science at the heart of archaeology. So today's topic is going to be glass, and we'll get into some fun things. But I will start just with my stump speech. If you're not familiar with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, we are a statewide nonprofit that works to help protect and promote Florida's buried past. We do have kind of three main areas that we work with. Education and outreach, assisting local governments and assisting the state of Florida's Division of Historic Resources. And we have 8 regional centers across the state. So Florida is a pretty big place, and that allows us to kind of get out in local communities. And, you know, we were founded with this idea that anybody could pick up a phone and talk to an archaeologist who was familiar with the resources in their area, who could help look at something they may have found in their backyard, and who could easily come in and provide educational programming and opportunities like this. So glass, it's a really cool material that we find a lot of. Glass is essentially, you know, melted sand. It's made out of silica, and it's a pretty old technology. We see it, some early objects going back to the Egyptian, you know, 3,500 years or so. And the earliest glass objects weren't necessarily blown glass objects like we think of today. But they would use kind of molding and slumping and fusing techniques to kind of create these shapes. So example of a beautiful vase fish from a site in Egypt. And really we start to see blown glass in around the 1st century AD, going back to the Phoenicians, and then we see, you know, a takeoff in Rome and out throughout the Mediterranean. And they really do kind of develop those glass blowing techniques, and that becomes the dominant way that we create glass objects. And of course that's still true today. We have switched over to a lot more mechanized molding processes, things like that, but we still have lots of blown objects, you know, as art and other things. Glass in North America makes its way over with the Europeans. So some of the earliest glass objects we have here are actually glass beads that De Soto brought to Florida in the 1513s, as well as, you know, any of the sites in the Caribbean or in Mexico. You know, we're going to see glass trade objects coming with the Spanish and the Dutch and the British. But here in Florida, the earliest objects are those glass beads that De Soto brings, and you can see a selection of them here. They're pretty cool because we know the specific kinds that were brought over. These Nueve Cadez beads, which are kind of the square turquoisey blue, and then the chevron beads, which have all those kind of layers. They're like stacked, and then they polish them to reveal some of the layers inside. as well as some seed beads. So we find these specific beads are actually from a burial mound over in Citrus County on the Gulf Coast of Florida. The first kind of evidence we know of folks making glass here, it actually goes to Jamestown a few years later, but they bring over, there's a lot of written documentation about how they bring over 3 German glassmakers to kind of help them create things, both, window panes, but also other objects that they may have, tableware or things. And so we actually have archaeological evidence of these glassmakers making glass here too. So they found crucibles, which, to make glass, you have to melt, silica sand into really high levels to get it molten so you can work with it. So they found these crucibles, you can see here, that would have been where they were melting the glass, the container they were using to make that molten glass. And they do have a really cool reconstructed glass shop at Jamestown today. I think one of the links I sent out was a video of some of their glass blowers illustrating how they make glass objects. And they actually constructed that glass shop next to where they found all of these crucibles and like melted, fused weird glass objects and things like that. So pretty cool history there. And we do see, as industrialization happens and as people move into Florida and really start to build up the area, we see a lot of industry coming in, and they, manufacture molded glass bottles and jars and things. And there's a handful of different manufacturing companies, including the Tropical Canners that were here in Jacksonville, and they have some really cool mason jar kind of style things that they're making that say Florida on them. So some really cool, later objects that we can find as well. So making glass, as I say, one of the longest main techniques that we use is actually blowing glass, and it's a pretty intense technique, mostly because you're working with like very hot molten glass, right? So it does take a lot of skill. And so what you essentially do is you take a hollow pipe and you stick it, you have to heat the pipe up to get the molten glass to stick to it, but then you would get what we call a gather of molten glass on the end of the pipe. And you can work it and kind of shape it from that end. You actually, blow through the pipe to get air in there to create kind of whatever blown shape you want. So you can see here in the diagram. So you do the base of the object first, and then you put what we call a pontil rod or a punty rod onto the end of it, and then you break off the top, and then that's when you actually finish the top of the glass object. And then of course, you have to cool it down in a very slow, even manner, otherwise the extreme temperature changes will cause it to break or explode or shatter and all sorts of things like that. So they usually have to go into a kiln or a annealing oven to kind of control that cooling process. So, one of the biggest signs that we have if something is blown is that pontil scar on the bottom of these objects, that obvious where that secondary rod was attached. So, and this is just a cool illustration. It's from like an 1850s book showing, different glass blowing techniques. So, and really the process of making glass, of the glass manufacturing industry goes from this blowing glass into molding, and we see kind of all sorts of combinations of it in between. So, first it's maybe you're just blowing into a mold, and then you're maybe molding most of it, but still working some of it by hands. And then eventually we get into, big factories that can just shoot out hundreds and hundreds of glass bottles a minute, and it's fully mechanized, and the whole process, is a little more streamlined and a lot less labor intensive as well at that point. So. A lot of folks ask about how we get colors of glass, and this is a really cool aspect of it. Sometimes the different colors can give us insights into how old the bottles or the objects are, into where they were made. There is a lot of really cool, specific kind of like molecular analysis that you can do. We see this especially with a lot of glass beads that seed beads look like seed beads from the beginning of when they're made to today. So sometimes it can be hard to figure out what's going on. And there's not necessarily a lot of super great information about some of the specific places of manufacture for some of these glass objects, or the chemicals or the exact formulas they're using. So sometimes we can kind of work backwards and use like an XRF gun to look at the chemical makeup of the glass and then figure out where it came from or what was used to make it, things like that. anyways, so one of the ways that we see colors of glass is by different minerals that are in the glass, right? And the big thing to know is that a lot of sand, glass through time has a color, and it's just because of impurities that were there naturally. So it's not like people do try to make sand, glass certain colors, but they're also striving just as hard to make it perfectly clear. So some of the early glass that we see, especially like in the colonial period here, we see a lot of olive greens and olive ambers. So the first two on the left are kind of an example of an olive green and an olive amber. The one in the middle looks like black glass, and we get a lot of comments and questions about this as well. There is black glass, but most of the black glass that you see is actually an olive green. So the best way to determine the true color of glass is to hold it up to the light, or put something like white behind it if it's a lighter color, to really kind of get the sense of the true color. So this is actually an olive green glass bottle. It's just really, really dark, so you wouldn't quite get that color until you held it up to the light. We also see a lot of aquas and a lot of ambers that are kind of just due to natural impurities. So as I say, trying to get clear glass becomes a huge goal of the manufacturing industry. And so part of what happens is that people realize the impurities that are in the glass, and they try to put other things in there to cancel them out. So one of the techniques that we see is putting manganese into glass to kind of help balance out some of those aqua and blues and greens and teal colors that we get. And the end result is actually really cool, because we have a very diagnostic type of glass that is developed with this, and we call it like solarized amethyst glass or solarized manganese glass, or a couple different phrases, terms that we use for it. But essentially what happens is the glass is clear until it sits out in the sunlight, and then it turns purple. So, and this is just a natural thing that happens. So you can kind of see, these are examples of street lights, kind of the globes for street lights. And you can see the top has definitely got this purple tint to it. But the bottom, where it actually screwed into the base and was not as exposed to the sunlight, is actually a little clearer. So really cool example on one piece of that process happening. And then just the other thing to think about is when we say clear glass, a lot of it's not actually clear. A lot of it does have still some sort of straw amber tint, maybe a green tint. I was making pickles the other day in my kitchen, and I had two mason jars, and I held them up, and they're both clear glass mason jars, right? But one's definitely blue, and one's definitely got this kind of brown tint to it. So something to just kind of think about, like even those slight hints of color can give us a little more information about what's going on and where things are made and things of that nature. So to get really bright, vibrant colors, folks are definitely trying to add different minerals in there. So we have cobalt blue as a color, right? Because people literally put cobalt into glass to make blue colors. Milk glass, which is something that was very popular in the early 1900s. We see additives of tin or zinc oxide. We even see folks putting gold into glass to get some really nice, like those true bright red colors. So all sorts of different things that get mixed in there. So that can be another interesting way to figure out what was happening and when things were made. So a lot of the glass objects we find are bottles before plastics. That was what everything came in. If you bought anything at the store, it was going to be in some sort of glass bottle, some sort of glass container. A lot of these things were reused. In other places, people still can, you can return the bottles for deposit, and bottles are reused, versus in the United States, we tend to just throw things away or recycle them. So a little less environmental here today, but in the past, this is what they had. They didn't have the readily available supply of cheap plastics to put everything in. So, but what this can tell us a lot is about consumerism, about trade, about use and reuse and access to things. And we partnered with the St. Augustine Lighthouse to create a curriculum through Project Archaeology. And one of the things we highlighted were all the glass objects that were found that the lighthouse keeper's family had, and how that let us know what they were interested in. So we know we had makeup bottles there, which you might not think of as something to find at a lighthouse, kind of on the fringe of town, a little further away from things. You wouldn't necessarily think of women getting all dolled up, but they had makeup there. ketchup bottles. We found Lee and Pepin's Worcestershire cap here, bottle cap, glass bottle cap. So some things that we still use today, right? Letting us know the kinds of things they had. And then some patent medicine bottles. So this is a 3-in-1 patent medicine bottle, and that's a whole really interesting thing too, because the patent medicines, how they worked is if you wanted to get a patent on what was inside of the bottle, you had to disclose the recipe, and write down what it is, so that if somebody else tried to steal, copy the recipe, you could prove like, oh, but it was my recipe. But nobody wanted to do that. They didn't want to reveal their secrets. They maybe also didn't want to admit what kind of weird, terrible things were in some of these concoctions. So what they would do is they would patent the actual bottle itself. So there's a whole lot of information about patent medicine bottles and where they were made and who was making them and the period, the specific years that they were manufacturing it. So there's a really cool paper trail on that, and so we can learn a lot about those things too. We also see a lot of reuse of glass bottles. Once again, if you think, back to times before we had trash pickup that would drive by your house once a week and haul your trash off, you had to figure out how to dispose of your trash yourself. And glass is a very durable material, and even glass bottles, cylinder is the strongest geometric shape too, right? So they're a lot sturdier than you think. So we used to see glass bottles are reused for all sorts of things, especially things like building and construction. So there's some really cool examples here of some sites in Florida. The Pablo Sabate site, so this is a Menorcan man who owned a piece of property, if anyone's familiar with the Prince of Wales pub in St. Augustine on Spanish and Treasury Streets, I believe. Pablo Sabate had a tavern, a house and a tavern on the property in the 1700s, and archaeologists digging down there found the foundations of the structure. It was a coquina, or excuse me, I think it was a tabby structure. So it was a concrete structure that was built out of shell, and you make the concrete out of burning the oyster shell, creating the lime, and the building foundation was glass bottles. So you can kind of see in this photo here with the different stratigraphy layers and the meter stick. And you can see just a builder's trench full of glass bottles. But if you own a tavern and you're trying to expand your building and you need something as a foundation, it's a really economical and a good choice, right, to use those glass bottles. A really amazing site from right there in New Smyrna is this well that was found. I think they call it like the Budweiser bottle well. That was on the Detweiler estate from the 1880s. And the Detweilers become the Bonnet families, I think, which are still well known there. But there's over 800 bottles were used to construct this well. And it's a pretty amazing sight to see them all kind of stacked up in line. But once again, really great building material, really readily available. So why not use it, right? And I believe there's a cool exhibit on this site at the museum. I believe Dot even worked there. So see if she has any secrets that she wants to share with us. And another cool site here in Jacksonville, just north of St. Augustine, is at Camp Landing, which was, it's still a National Guard base, but during the World War II, it was used as the place of a German POW camp. And they used glass bottles to kind of line different walkways and roads and things in the camp. And that's some of the only material evidence that you can really kind of steadily see on the landscape from this time period. So it's pretty cool. They sunk them upside down and created nice kind of like curbs and borders for their walkways. So window glass is probably another really big common category of glass objects we find. You can tell it's window glass because it's going to be flat. A lot of other glass objects are not just perfectly flat and straight. That being said, the window glass isn't necessarily, this nice, our windows today are, perfectly clear, perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, and that's not necessarily what windows have looked like through time. If you've ever been in a historic structure, a lot of times you can tell if they're original windows is because you can't quite see through the glass perfectly, right? It's got waves to it, it's got bubbles, it's got some different things going on. But we do find a lot of window glass. It can be a really cool archaeological clue to figuring out what architecture looked like. So if you have a builder's trench from where a wall was, and you have a whole bunch of window glass in one area. That's good evidence that there was a window maybe above there. And another just cool, interesting thing about windows is glass in general. You know, we think it's a solid object, but it's not quite ever fully solid. It actually is like still kind of liquidy. So especially older windows, you know, you can see evidence of that because the top of the pane's usually thinner because it drips through time and it kind of pools at the bottom. So a lot of times historic windows are gonna have thicker bottoms than they do at the top. So cool things to think about. This is by no means, you know, the full spectrum of glass objects that we find. Glass is, once again, as I say, it's a very durable, very sturdy, becomes very easy to manufacture and make once we kind of get some of these techniques figured out. So we see it's used for tableware. Why do you think you call it a glass when you go to get a glass of water? Because they were made out of glass, right? Even plates, dishes, cookware. Today we still see a lot of glass being used. Beads and jewelry. If you don't have fine gemstones, you probably have some glass objects there, right? So very commonly used for those kinds of things. Decorative objects, pieces of art. You know, there's an endless number of things you can do with glass. Toys, we find a lot of marbles, things like that. And then industrial uses, a lot of application here. For instance, we have the old caps for the power lines, right, that were there, made out of glass. So lots of uses and applications there. So glass, especially glass bottles, are really interesting, and they're really diagnostic. So when I say diagnostic, it means, you know, we can figure out a lot of information about them. They can tell us about how old something is. They can tell us maybe, you know, where people came from or where they were getting things from or who they were trading with. So there's a lot of information that can be attached to these glass objects. And one of the reasons for this is that, especially when it comes to glass bottles, like the changes through time of manufacturing are pretty succinct. They're pretty well documented. And some of the changes happen really rapidly too. So this is, I believe, 13 different bottles, and this is 100 years of bottles, right? So we can see how distinctive kind of each bottle looks, and that some of these specific shapes and sizes only lasted for 4 or 5 years. So when you find them, you can really narrow down the date range of a site, or a component of a site, right? And so, you know, looking at the shape, the color, the manufacturing techniques, the marks that are from there, the thickness of the glass, even the clarity. So all of these things can help give us clues. So if you have a bottle, things to look for when trying to figure out how old they are. And I know we sent around the SHA glass bottle identification website. That's a really cool website. They almost have it set up kind of like a flow chart where you can kind of go through, like, okay, does it look like this or that? Does it have this or that? Does it have one of these? What color is it? What shape is it? You know, and you can kind of go through and figure out a really good estimate of how old the bottle may be. And in some cases, you may be able to hammer it down to like exactly when and where it was made and by who, if they had some really good manufacturing marks on it. So the first thing to look for are really seams of bottles. Fully hand-blown bottles do not have seams, right? If it did not go into a mold, it does not have seams. So that can be a big clue as to the age of a bottle, or, you know, as I say, we still make hand-blown things. So it can also give you information into the manufacturing technology. The bottle finishes, so the finish is the very top of the bottle. It includes the lip and the collar. And then the bottle bases, so that's the very bottom of the bottle. And those are the two most diagnostic parts, the very top and the very bottom. And then, of course, if you have any manufacturing marks on it, if you have embossed logos or different you know, dates or names of places, right, all that's going to give you a lot of information about when and where it was made and what it was used for as well. So this is just some basic terminology of bottles too, which is always kind of nice to have, to be able to navigate, you know, going through the website to understand what they're asking for when they ask what's the shoulder shape like. And we have, you know, these specific terms because it also helps us in communicating information about them. So looking at some seams here, as I say, there's all sorts of different types of bottle molds that we have, 2 parts, 3 parts, There's some where you're only molding the bottom of it. You have to finish the top, and all sorts of different things. We also have some that are, the bottles are spinning in the mold, so you can get these kind of concentric circles that go around the bottle as it's kind of like scraping against the mold. But you know, a lot of glass objects today, we've gotten really good at hiding the seams. But if you look in your kitchen at you know, any number of jars or bottles, you'll see some seams on them. The bottle finishes, and this is just, there's so many different types of bottle finishes. It's a whole fun world you can explore on the SHA bottle website and take a look at them. But some of this is reflective of the actual bottle technology. So for instance, before we have screw caps, right, we have more things like that have corks in them, or that have you know, different ways of sealing them. So we can see the changing in the technology of packaging and reflected in some of these things, and all sorts of different yeah, just tons of different things that are going on. Some that are finished a little fancier than others, some that are hand finished, some that are molded, some that, you know, all varieties of things. So something to look at. And then the bases of the bottles. So a common thing that we see with hand-blown bottles is you're going to have these push-ups or kick-ups in the base, and part of that's because if you are going to have a pontil rod and you end up with a big hunk of glass from that stuck on there, right, you want to kind of plan ahead and have that up higher so that it doesn't create an uneven surface for it to sit on. And I think there, you know, it also becomes just part of the wine and champagne industry to have those bottle shapes for some other reasons. Once again, thinking about looking for seams that you may find, looking for pontil scars, and then also looking for things like maker's marks or identifying symbols or dates or places, names, all sorts of things that are written on the bases, that are written on the side of the bottle, different designs or motifs that may be on objects. You know, they may give us information about you know, who is making them, where they're being made, all this kind of cool stuff. I love it when they just put all of the information straight on the bottle. Here you go. You can figure out exactly which pharmacists had the medicine here in this bottle from Portland, Oregon. So that's always great when they just put everything that you need to know right on the bottle. Love it. And then I mentioned color earlier, but color can it's not the best thing to go off of for dating on its own, because we see a lot of colors that are, you know, made from the beginning of glass that we still have today, or you know, you can also get different colors from different techniques. So the technology may change, but the kind of outcome looks the same. But there are some general trends in colors. So olive green is more popular before 1900, and this is probably just, you know, due to some of the manufacturing, and they can't quite get the impurities out, and, you know, whatever else happens. Milk glass is really popular from the 1870s to the 1950s, but once again, you could still go buy, you know, we see a lot of like cold cream and makeups and things come in those bottles, but you know, the people still manufacture and sell some of those things today still. So clear is uncommon before the 1870s, and once again, this is also, you know, going back to that manufacturing and the impurities in the glass and trying to get it, you know, all worked out. So as we move through time, it gets a little more common. The manganese glass, that solarized glass, is really cool because there's definitely this range, very tight range of when it's the most popular, when you see tons and tons of it being manufactured. And it drops off pretty steadily at 1915, and this is because of the war that breaks out, right? The Great War, and manganese is used for whatever war effort it is used for, and so it gets diverted from glass manufacturing to those other causes. And I think after the war, they find other techniques and things to do to get that clear glass, so it's not really brought back after that either, except maybe to make, you know, vibrant purple bottles. And then window glass, you know, this, just to take a step back, you know, these workshops we designed to talk about the science, but then also to get folks involved in doing some of these hands-on things. So congratulations, because this is virtual, you are spared from doing a lot of math this afternoon. So there's the good news. The bad news is I didn't get to pass around all of the cool old bottles we have, and you'll have to go walk around your house and find your own bottles to look at for some of the things that we've talked about today. But window glass is really interesting because it is actually very diagnostic and datable in a lot of ways. And contrary to what I would think, it gets thicker through time. I would think it gets thinner through time because we can more easily manufacture stronger glass that can be thinner, that will withstand. But I think there's actually a whole different set of things going on there that we changed the technology, and we also, you know, I live in Florida. I want something in my window that's not going to let like a tree limb just come straight through it if we have a strong storm or a hurricane or something, right? So so we actually have thicker glass windows now than we did in the past. So there's a couple different ways that you can figure out the thickness. A lot of it you do need, you know, a certain sample size, so you can't just have like one piece. It's not going to be very accurate. But if you had, you know, a lot of different pieces, you can do some formulas. Moore's regression formula is the one that blows my mind, because you figured out this formula that you can take the mean thickness and you multiply it by this crazy random number, and you add this other crazy random number, and it will literally spit out a date at the end of it, like 1815. That will be your mean window glass date. And that's pretty amazing to have discovered and sorted out all of that. But there's also, you know, this is just a chart showing all of the different methods. There's several methods that folks use for figuring out the dates, and they don't all quite explicitly line up perfectly, but there is a general trend you can see of, you know, the smaller sizes, smaller thicknesses are at the top, and the thicker is at the bottom, and the smaller dates are at the top, and they go forward through time. So just some general trends, and so you could, you know, even do use several of the formulas at your site and see what you get, and come up with, you know, the best 2 out of 3 there, or the mean of all of these different formulas. So so really interesting stuff to find out about window glass. You never knew. Nails, also very exciting things. It's the little mundane things that can give us the most information about people from the past sometimes. So with that, I can take any questions you may have. And I also just wanted to share one of my favorite pieces of glass art. Dale Chihuly is just an amazing artist who creates these wonderful, whimsical pieces. So you know, the glass is alive and strong today, and there's still a lot to appreciate about the art form. So let's see, I will stop sharing. And I do see one question.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. If those who are participating, if you'll take a look, the chat bubble is in the top right-hand side of your screen. Take a look. If you got questions for Emily about glass, by all means, type them in there. It looks like Alan had asked about lighthouse prism glass, and I had actually sent him a reply back referring him to talk to John Mann at the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, because I know John knows a lot about prism glass and how it was applied to lighthouses and date ranges and all that. But you might have something to share too, Emily.
I probably not as much as he does. I do know, you know, there's a lot to be said of the different lenses and how they figure out how to bounce the light off, and you know, that really projects the light, and it's just some amazing physics and science that folks have figured out. So
yeah, absolutely.